Consulting is here today to work with you to better understand the situation at hand in the grounding of the 737 MAX. As a reminder, I'm Alexa.
And I'm Eleanor.
And today we recommend you redefine your stakeholders and take the customer segment and break it out into not only the commercial airlines, but include the passengers as a key customer to restore trust in the marketplace. To understand why trust was lost, we begin with what drove the creation of the 737 MAX.
There were three key events that drove the creation of the 737 MAX. The start was when our major competitor Airbus launched the A320neo, a re-engined version of the A320. This aircraft was extremely popular with our customers, and that led us to look internally and think, what can we do to combat our declining market share? We decided on re-engineering our 737, the greatest selling aircraft in aviation history. And we got this to market by doing three things. First, we self-regulated by working with the FAA to certify the majority of the aircraft ourselves. Second, we worked to design the aircraft so that there was only limited training that a pilot needed to transfer from 737 MAX, or 737, to a MAX. And then next, we also worked to expedite the process and have lower costs by having certain features not be necessary on the aircraft. It was up to the disclosure of our customers.
As Eleanor mentioned, this was a high-pressure environment, and from this we can take that there was a susceptibility to corporate leniency. But when the announcement came out in July of 2013, the design detailed three things. It would be a re-engine, it would be more efficient, and there would be an additional feature on the plane likely attributed to the re-engineering. Now, what did this imply in the future? Well, we see that we got to market fairly quickly. We also see that stock prices reached the highest they've ever been. But we see two crashes. The first, which we recovered from in the stock, actually reaching that high after that. But then we see the second, and we notice that the red in the boxes of the crash may be attributed to this additional feature. We looked into the aftermath of the crash. What exactly happened that attributed this additional feature to those crashes? On March 29th of 2019, Ethiopian Airlines released black box data that explicitly shows the MCAS as a factor in the crash, similar to the data that was released from Lion Air just months prior. So speculation begins to swirl. It's now attributed to the MCAS, and we lose perception, we lose favor in the marketplace, and this drives a loss of trust.
Today, we're going to analyze that loss of trust by first understanding why it was lost in the first place, which was our Boeing's failure to hit our values. And then second, we're going to think about the consequences of that lost trust, both in an economic and in a legal manner. And then finally, we're also going to think about what we can do to recover, which is our recommendation. And in that recommendation, we are thinking about focusing more on our customers, segmenting that as a new stakeholder with both the airliners and the passengers, and providing more outreach and compensation. Furthermore, in looking at who Boeing's stakeholders are, these are the stakeholders that we currently identify as ours. What we are recommending is taking that customer group and splitting that into airlines and passengers. Traditionally, you might think that a passenger would be a second-tier stakeholder, but these passengers are so important to our airlines that we need to start thinking about them like they are first class to us. Furthermore, we also want to call out the regulators. Given this situation, we think that they are especially important. Now, in the past, we thought mostly about our shareholders. We thought about our suppliers, and we thought about our employees. And we want to continue to focus on our employees with our recommendation, in addition to thinking about our airlines and our passengers.
If we want to rebuild trust with these stakeholders, we need to understand what trust is. Now, similar to how not every passenger experiences their journey from point A to point B the exact same, not every stakeholder experiences trust the same. So we look first at economy class trust. That is fundamental, that is complying with legal regulation. We move then into business class trust. That is living out our corporate values and complying with legal regulation. And then we move into first class trust, and that is taking a duty of care with each stakeholder independently, as well as living our values and complying with legal regulation. Now, how do we determine which stakeholder needs which level of success? We looked at 6 ethical frameworks and ultimately decided on balancing virtue and duty. It's virtue because it encompasses Boeing's values and how they live them, and duty because it focuses on the means by which we achieve the ends that Boeing is going for. Not only focusing on the consequences, but also doing what is right because it is inherently right to do so. And that helps us elevate from economy class trust into business class trust. Now, in the application at hand, we think about the economy class trust that was satisfied in the approval and creation of the MAX. Then we think about the business class trust, and we see that we violated 3 key values that Boeing shows. Most importantly, safety, that we dismiss these complaints. And the fear here is that we lead to a slippery slope. We create an internal organizational culture that allows these things to pass through and becomes a cycle that we don't want to continue. But after the crashes, we have an opportunity to reinstate our values and in our response to show that we still live them. However, we don't believe that's been done yet. So again, we've followed economy class trust. We've been legally compliant. But with business class trust, we've now violated our 4 other values. Most important here we want to call out is diversity and inclusion. Diversity of thought, inclusion of cultures. As a global enterprise, this needs to be at the front of our minds. Now, an example I want to share is that in offering monetary victim compensation, some of the Ethiopian passengers' families were afraid to accept that compensation because of their religious beliefs or because of a fear of ransom in Ethiopia, that all of their community would know they've suddenly experienced a windfall of wealth, and now their other family members could be held for ransom in return for that wealth. After they've experienced loss of a family member aboard our aircraft, we don't want this to happen as well. In addition to these values being failed to live, we've suffered legal and economic implications thus far.
Looking at the legal implications, we have both current lawsuits as well as investigations that are ongoing. As far as lawsuits right now, everyone is alleging that we have put profits over safety, whether that be the families, the pilots, airliners, or our own shareholders. Furthermore, there is also investigations that have been launched by multiple governing bodies, and then these are all in reference to fraud, failure to provide a good approval process, and then not communicating well with our shareholders. These legal implications also have an economic aspect to them as well. So we have right now accumulated costs as far as the payouts that we've given, in addition to the cost of having to re-engine this aircraft, as well as those legal fees I mentioned. Furthermore, we also have opportunity costs. Our stock today hit an all-time low for the past 2 months, and that was due to things like our production slowing by 20%, canceled orders, and our brand value going down the longer that this issue plays out in the media.
Now this is a lot, so take a step back and become the board of directors of NASA after the Challenger disaster. Think about 2 key things. 1, did we violate informed consent with the pilots? Were they properly trained? This is comparable to the astronauts and the varying levels of knowledge about the O-ring risk. 2, what is our ethical obligation to the victims? Is it just legal, or is there something more than that? For this, we want to think about the communities invested, what is the public perception, and how has our brand been impacted? We believe we have more than just a legal obligation to these families.
So now we're getting into our recommendation, and as I mentioned, we really want to focus on our employees. But I would also like to thank you all because your board of directors independent review, we believe, satisfies this. We've created an internal whistleblowing protocol, we've invested in employee education, and furthermore, we have redesigned the chain of command. So while we can't fix the past, these are great measures so that we don't see unsafe aircraft going to the market in the future.
So after NASA did their internal org redesign, which we've also done first, we move into prioritizing our stakeholders. First, we recognize the airlines because they too realize trust has been broken and they're demanding that we restore it. In this, it's important to note that not only will we proactively compensate fares and lost sales, we'll also calculate expected flights given the upcoming holiday season and perhaps a smaller commercial airlines fleet than they budgeted. Next, we think about the passengers. To effectively restore trust with the airlines, we restore trust with those they care about, and those are their passengers. This is Tony, and he was aboard the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 that went down. Tony's not from Ethiopia, so we meet him where he is as a journalist, activist, and family man in Kenya. There are costs associated with any recommendation.
But I want to focus on the fact that we can make $60 billion by clearing our backlog. And the costs associated with our plan are worth it. And thinking even further, it's not just the $60 billion, it's the money we make from the Dreamliner and from our military contracts as well.
It's done. Okay. Round of applause. Okay, we're going to move into the Q&A session, so we're going to have our Chair of Center for Leadership Ethics Board, Mr. Russ Johnson, ask the question.
Multi-part questions. On the screen is one of Boeing's enduring values, safety. We value human life and well-being above all else and take action accordingly. We are personally responsible and collectively accountable for safety at all levels to our teammates, our passengers, and those who service our products. Boeing's corporate culture has been cited as a root cause of the Boeing 737 crisis and for not adhering to Boeing's values. Why? Identify 3 changes that could be implemented by leadership at Boeing to bolster an ethical corporate culture.
Yeah, good. Okay. So we agree that the corporate culture could be an underlying cause of this slippery slope in which we dismiss some of these early, seemingly small ethical concerns, and they continue to downward spiral into much larger issues. In order to combat this, our first recommendation is that internally we look at the board of directors and we add term limits. So 8 of the 13 members of the board were here in the creation of the 737 MAX. Now, while that's exciting, if you're going to bolster diversity of thought, we perhaps need some fresh ideas, some new faces, and bringing those in. We also want to include an independent board of directors. So dismissing Dennis was a step in this direction, as no longer he serves as the CEO and the chairman, but actually including David Calhoun now is also not an independent director. So we want to establish that there is a clear difference between our board of directors and the C-suite that is overseeing the everyday obligations of Boeing to better match this agency issue that we're seeing right now. Our third recommendation.
Yeah, in addition, as we kind of mentioned today, we think the 10 steps that you all outlined are an excellent way to begin that process of thinking of our culture of safety within the company. But in order to make sure that these things happen and that they do not slip through the cracks, we believe that we need a task committee within the board of directors to make sure this gets done, and in addition to allocate even more resources to figuring out how we can make these 10 steps happen and not something that might just fall through the cracks. Thank you.
Round of applause.